What's up guys, it's Rowan here from Smart TV, and today I'm sitting down chatting with Derek. Now, maths and maths advanced is, one of those challenging subjects that, often it can be really easy when you get an early mark that's disappointing, particularly one in the 50% range, that you can go, you know what, maybe I need to give up and drop this subject, it's not for me. The challenge is though, often maths can be a subject, particularly maths advanced, that is an important assumed knowledge or prerequisite for university as well. And so there's often very good reasons for keeping it as a subject to maximize options for university. So the question that we want to unpack today really is, well, what happens if you get a result that's just not that great? How can you turn it around? Because you can, and that's what we're going to find out from Derek's journey today. So welcome, Derek.
Hey, Rowan.
So just to set a bit of a scene for everyone here, you were taking advanced maths and you had your first year 11 assessment. Mm-hmm. What happened?
Oh, so from what I remember, I remember standing outside my maths classroom and thinking to myself, I'm going to smash this exam. I've done all the homework. Every time my teacher has said, do these exercises tonight, I've done them with these, I've marked them, I've gotten all the ticks in my math book. I'm going to smash this. But then in the back of my mind, there was a voice saying, just don't stuff up. Just don't stuff up. I remember walking into the exam room, starting the exam, and from the multiple choice, I got off to a decent start. I got 3 out of the 5, I think, confidently. And then I looked at the very first short answer question, and I was like, oh no. I haven't seen this question in my life before. I have no clue how to approach it. And then I remember saying to myself, I'll just skip it. Hopefully there's another question I can do that I can eat time with it. So I move on to the next question, another one where it's like, oh no, what have I done? What do I do? And I remember just going through back and forth all those questions in the exam paper saying, what do I do? What do I do? And, I finally managed to write some things down that may have not been completely right, but I remember, writing all those things down, even though I didn't know what I was talking about half the time. And then eventually, I look up, the teacher's like, pens down. And so pretty much I walked out of the exam room and I said, oh no, what have I done? And then fast forward to when I got the exam back, I see a 54 on my exam paper. I'm like, I blew it. I blew it, yeah.
And so that, it wasn't a shock when you got the result back maybe, because I think you probably saw that coming a little bit after the exam, being in the exam itself, right? But certainly, what were you telling yourself and how did you feel when you got that 54? You saw it in writing on the paper.
Oh, well, when I saw the 54, I'm like, is that it? Is that the extent of my abilities? I tried so hard, did all my homework, and what I get in return is a 54% on an exam paper. So I was really questioning, am I meant to be in advanced math, or should I drop down to standard and just, make the most of what I can down there?
So you obviously didn't choose to drop down.
Yeah.
You kept going. So how did you find the motivation to keep going? Because, I find that, like for most students getting a result like that, you feel, you feel stupid, right? You think, well, is something wrong with me? As you said, it's not for me. You managed to push through that. Yeah. How?
Oh, well, pretty much when I came home from getting the result, I think the most important thing I did was to take a step back and just sort of analyze everything I did. What did I do wrong? What did I do and what didn't I do? And so I pretty much said to myself, maybe I did as much as I could, but I didn't do enough. I did as much as I could from what I thought I could do, but I just didn't do enough. Maybe I should have, tried some more difficult questions, or maybe I should have, asked for extra help in class if I didn't really understand something rather than just looking at the answer straight away. So it's sort of taking a step back, sort of analyzing everything I've done, and then from there, making a plan on what to do next. I can keep on doing the homework my teacher assigns me, but from there, maybe when I'm finished with that, start doing some more difficult practice questions, maybe even timing myself to see if I can do it fast. And from there, just building and building and building until I can get that confidence back up from 54.
Yeah, so I think what's important that you shared is that you transitioned from, okay, yes, this is painful and horrible, to essentially trying to reflect on, well, why did this happen? What were the inputs? What were the things I did or didn't do that led to this output, this mark being 54%? And it seems like from that, you identified, okay, actually, there were a number of inputs, things that I did or did not do that I could have done differently, that might have helped me and made a difference. Now, you did mention prior to us, sort of jumping in and starting this conversation that, that 54 still left a bit of a legacy, right? And it carried over for some time. yeah, what impact did it have? Because clearly you pushed through, but what impact did it have for a period of time for you?
Oh, well, you know, before, like, it stayed with me for a long time. Like, before I walked into every exam, not even just maths, you know, I'd be like, am I gonna get another 50? Or am I actually, is this gonna be the time I step up? So yeah, I did carry it with me for a much longer period of time. But I feel like as soon as I went over my second exam, you know, I improved a bit. I think I got like around 60, which wasn't a massive improvement. But, you know, at least I reassured myself that, you know, the 54 isn't me. 54 doesn't define me. I can like exceed my expectations from what happened in my first assessment.
You could see that progression. It was like, great, I just need to get a little bit of progress. Yeah. And I think that's important because one of the things I observe as well is that, you know, changing your results happens, but it also doesn't happen overnight, right? In the sense that you're not going to go necessarily from a 54 to a, you know, an 80, a band 5 from one assessment to the next. Now, sometimes that can happen if you just really did have a bad day. There's some other extenuating circumstances, right? But often I find that it does take time to chip away at it. Yeah. Now, I think just to highlight the good news, and you know, if we fast forward for a moment, and then we'll come back and we'll fill in the gaps. You know, for students listening as well, like at the end of the day, I think the great part about this story is that you ended up scoring a band 5 in your HSC for advanced maths. So congratulations. Thank you. You know, I think we worked it out before. It was, you know, a 27% improvement, right? Which I imagine when you saw that 54, as you said, like it would have been hard to imagine that by the end of year 12, like you would be scoring a solid band 5 for advanced maths. So I think congratulations, and I think what it shows is that it was a good decision not to drop in the end and keep going, but it also shows, I think, for other students, you know what, you can actually turn a poor assessment around, whether or not that's your first assessment or whether or not it's another one. Like I think actually you can, with some work, which we're going to find out what you did, turn things around. So let's find out a little bit like what it was that you sort of did to turn things around, right? So you said the first thing you did was that reflection, okay, really important. What were you then doing week to week for maths afterwards? So you've obviously done that assessment, didn't look so good, did a reflection. Yeah, what did your week to week sort of habit look like for maths?
Unlike most of my other subjects, like from the get-go, as soon as I got a 54, I knew that maths was something I needed consistency. That's all I thought about. And so maths was really the only subject where I worked on it every single day, like even on weekends, apart from Sundays where I took breaks. But I consistently, as soon as I got home, like when I looked at my timetable for the afternoon, maths was the first thing I slotted in. So I knew that, you know, I had to do maths consistently if I really wanted to get good at it. And then from there, you know, I figured out the things, my strengths and weaknesses. I feel like that's really important. Like from that exam, the 54 I got, I really knuckled down on the things I didn't do well in. Like that first question where I was like, oh no, what do I do? You know, I figured out what I did wrong with it and I worked on it until to the point where I saw that question in like a past paper and I was like, oh, I've seen that before. And I did it easily within 2 minutes. So I feel like finding the things I struggled with as well and making sure that I did work on them. I wasn't just doing the things, you know, I may have enjoyed because I got it right. Yeah. So from there...
So let's just pause for a moment because I think there's a really important point that you've made within that that's worth highlighting, which is you effectively doubled down on your mistakes. So you didn't look at them and go, oh, okay, that's frustrating, annoying, move on. It was like, hey, wait a minute, this is an important diagnostic. Like if I'm making these mistakes now, I'm going to make them later. So I've got to fix them so that when I get them later, I'm going to get them right, essentially. And so what I'm hearing is it wasn't just going back and doing the ones you got wrong in the assessment. I'm hearing that you were finding other similar questions and doing more practice on them so that by the time you saw it in the exam, you're like, oh, I've done that before. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's important to not just find a question you get wrong and then figure out, oh, that's the answer. It's about finding the question you got wrong and making sure that you're getting good at it, making sure that you're confident when you're doing it. So when you encounter it in an exam, that you can say, oh, I've done this before 1,000 times, and you can just be able to do it with ease.
Great. So essentially, like, it's almost replicate the correct, not look at the answer and go, oh, that's how they got it right, cool, I've got it. Yeah. Do it and replicate it and get it right. Like, that's the standard we've got to hit. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So that sort of reflection was step 1, doubling down on mistakes was step 2, right? What else are then you doing as part of this sort of turnaround, right, that happened for maths?
I think from there, like especially in year 12, I think the most important thing I did was start to do practice papers, because practice papers are really where all the chunk of the hard questions you're going to encounter in the HSC are. So I remember from there, because like I said before, when I first prepared for my first assessment in year 11, I was doing questions you see in the textbook that my teacher was just giving me, which pretty much are just fundamental questions, just to make sure you got your head wrapped around it. But what they really don't have are the questions that really challenge you and push you to your limits in how you can solve certain mathematical concepts. So pretty much you find all the past papers you need to, whether it's a trial or an actual HSC past paper, and you just start doing them. And maybe there's questions that you still find hard, and you just look back and you do what I said. Just keep doing them over and over.
How
again.
early were you starting to integrate like past HSC questions into your study in year 12?
I think from the start of year 12, which is because that's when I first met Ami and was working hard with him.
Yeah, amazing. So start implementing them, and you've also mentioned that you're doing daily, except for Sundays, math study. So was that doing these practice questions? Was it doing the homework? What were you doing in that daily sort of like maths habit that you built?
Well, during school, I did have maths once a day. There wasn't a day during like my timetable where I didn't have maths. So the first portion of my study would to finish the homework, because I know my teacher the next day would be, asking us, have we done it? And then from there, I'd review what I've done, see how I went, give myself like an overall, was it like thumbs up, thumbs down? And from there, work on harder questions, seeing if, I need work on these areas or not. And then from there, building onto it, going on to past paper questions of that similar concept to make sure that I've got it locked down pat.
Yeah, amazing. And that's great. And how long were you then spending per day then if you've got this daily maths practice going on? Like, was it half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, more? Like, what are we looking at?
Most days it would be an hour, but if there was something that I'd really be confused with and I really wanted to do well in it, I'd go over the hour, maybe like an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah, great. And why was maths so important for you to sort of dedicate that time to? Because if we zoom out for a moment, you've got 12 units. Did you take 10 or 12 into your HSC?
I took 11.
11, okay, cool, in between. So either way though, it's 2 units out of 11, right? Yeah. And yet, you also could have made the decision to drop down a standard, but you didn't, right? You sort of stayed and fought. Yeah. Why was maths important to you, and why were you dedicating that amount of time?
Well, I feel like maths is probably one of the most unique subjects, unlike other subjects, because with subjects like biology, English, business, it's sort of like you learn things, you learn just knowledge and you store it in your head, and then during the exam you just have to regurgitate that information into succinct answers, right? But with maths, it's more about learning concepts and then through your own merit having to solve problems, and you really have to think critically and think hard when it comes to maths. And I feel like that, even though, I always ask myself the question, is this going to help me in real life? Like, am I going to learn about quadratics in real life? But as soon as I progressed in year 12, I started to learn that maths is not just about learning maths. It's more about being able to solve problems that you just encounter in everyday life, being able to think about different ways of solving problems, being able to think about, what have you learned, and using the stuff you've learned to solve problems pretty much. And that, like, even though you don't do maths after school, that helps a lot.
Awesome. So it was really a commitment to actually learning at the end of the day, right? Like, great, like this is going to give me a useful skill set for problem solving long term. I'm going to challenge myself, basically, which was really awesome to hear. So, one of the things you mentioned briefly before is that at the start of the year 12 journey, you started working with Ami, another smart tutor, particularly to give you some support for maths. What prompted you to reach out at that point of the journey to actually get some help?
I've been because thank heavens to my parents, they knew I was struggling with maths for a long time. And actually before me, I did have a handful of tutors that I went to. But the problem was most of the tutors I went to, it was a class of math students. And for me personally, I felt like I always needed some one-on-one time with a tutor because, math students is a bunch of different people with a bunch of different problems, and a teacher can't really go through one by one during like a 30-minute or 1 hour class. So I felt like I really needed just a single person that can just focus on me for like an hour. And that's when in year 12, I was like, I just need a one-on-one tutor to go. And that's when I met Ami. And I feel like Ami was probably the best tutor I could have because he was just so proactive with my maths. Like and because of the one-on-one, he always managed to just spend some time just checking up on how I'm going, how I'm feeling about my maths currently, making sure I wasn't getting overwhelmed. And I feel like that's one of the key things about having a private tutor, pretty much.
Yeah, awesome. And so then what did a typical session look like working with Ami?
Also, fortunately for me, I was able to meet with Ami 2 times a week, so at the start of the week and the end of the week. And pretty much at the start of the week, I'd go up to him and he'd ask me how I'd been with my maths, of course. He always wants to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I'm doing well, and like just emotionally as well. And pretty much I tell him, what I did throughout the weekend, if it was a Monday, and pretty much saying, what I have problems with, and he'd, take a note of that for like the rest of the lesson. And then from there, we'd start diving into questions. And the thing with me was, he's not one of those tutors where he's just like, here's a question, and I know you struggle with it, so I'm just going to show you how to do it. He sort of walks you through it slowly. Like, it might take 10, 20 minutes to do a single question, but at least you know that he's walking you through it. He's making sure that you're like actively taking in just the knowledge and knowing how to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, great. And then I know you mentioned to me also gave you a fair bit of like targeted work to do, like after the session as well. Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, so pretty much he always gave me stuff to do afterwards, especially with questions he knew I struggled with during the class. So he pretty much gave me, like, sometimes he'd give me a practice paper, and even during the HSC period, he took that up a notch. I told him things I had problems with, like for example, if I had problems with finance. And during the week, like from Monday to Friday, he'd look for practice papers that like specifically had tricky finance questions. And then by Friday, he'd be like, oh, here's one I found. Like if it was a trial paper, here's like a Balcom Hills trial paper with a really difficult finance question at the end. And he'd give it to me to work over on the weekend, so that by Monday, I'd be ready to give it to him, and just we could converse and exchange thoughts on how it went.
Yeah, amazing. That's great. And yeah, what was the best thing about working with, your other smart tutor and me?
Oh, probably, yeah, like I said before, he wasn't just a tutor that did it just to make sure you worked. He always made sure that like you emotionally and mentally you were always ready to, do well in school. Like I remember like times I had exams, like I managed to get his number, and like, after the exams, he'd always message me saying, hey, how'd you go? How do you feel? And even like at the start of a tutoring class, right after an exam, he'd be like, how'd you feel? How'd you went? And it was amazing because I was able to just share my thoughts with him, how I felt. And from that, because Ami was one-on-one, I was able to ask him questions. And from there, I could build my own confidence so that when I went to school, I could also ask my teacher questions. Because, in year 11, I really wasn't able to ask any questions. I was always nervous. But I feel like Ami helped me build up my confidence, saying, you have to ask the questions and don't be afraid to, because your teachers are there for you. And so tutors are there for you as well.
That's amazing to hear. Now, diving in, just a couple of questions, particularly in the lead up to the HSC trials and exams themselves, and maybe particularly the HSC exams, because I know your trials were a little disrupted, unfortunately, particularly with COVID. What did your prep look like in the lead up to the HSC exams for advanced maths?
Oh, well, for exams math, I think in the lead up to the HSC, I started doing practice papers more and more under time conditions. Like at the start of year 12, I only really did one a week, one every 2 weeks. But as soon as math, I feel like as soon as I finished learning all the content, like the only thing I really did was practice papers at that point. And since I said I study every day, it was pretty much a practice paper every day. If not, I'd skip one day or skip 2 days a week to use it to reflect on how I did before. Like if I did a really tricky practice paper, I use that time to just reflect on how I went and figure out what I did wrong, so that I can work on that for that day instead of just diving head into another practice paper.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so then you're doing practice papers, time conditions, and you're essentially, when you say you would take a day off to reflect, so you might do like a paper and then 2 days off and then you do another paper, right? Is that essentially what you were saying?
Or more of like I do a practice paper and then the day after I reflect.
Yeah, and what was that reflection process, right? Like what were you doing to reflect?
Oh, pretty much I looked through the answers as well, like sort of, and always have my red pen out to annotate. I feel like a really important thing in maths is to be able to annotate like your test. Like I remember getting tests back from school and you look through them and it's like there's teachers, like my teacher had a pink pen, she would just tick it, say good job, but then you'd see red pen just everywhere, like arrows everywhere saying, and like notes to myself saying, hey, do this next time, don't do this next time. And I feel like being able to write stuff down sort of reminded me, like when I look back on like a practice paper I did, you could see like I learned from the things I did wrong and just use that stuff to just improve next time.
That's fantastic. I think that's really great to hear, because I think so often as a student, we rely on our teachers to give us the feedback without ourselves reflecting over. And I think the better you can reflect as well, the better you're sort of getting into even a marker's headspace of like, what do I need to do here next time to get the results? So I think that's so awesome to hear. What did you do the night before the maths exam?
Oh, well, the night before my maths exam is a bit anticlimactic. I actually pretty much did nothing. Because, I feel like it was really important to not walk into the exam stressed out. Like I know, it's good to like sort of polish up the night before to make sure everything's in your head. But I feel like at that point, I've done so much work already that I feel like at this point it's just time for me to just recharge. Because it'd be good to walk into the exam with a full battery instead of being like absolutely deflated from the night before studying so hard. So yeah, the night before I pretty much I went to bed early, of course, had a glass of chalky milk, just sort of cool down, relax my body. And then I woke up the next morning, still not thinking that I have to study, but just thinking that, I'm going to walk into this exam today and I'm just going to smash it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And how did you manage the sort of stress and the time conditions of the exam itself so that you could be at your best?
Oh, well, for the time conditions in the exam, it wasn't really a problem for me because I've done all these past papers under time conditions. So the time aspect really wasn't a problem for me. I feel like the point of walking into the exam room and the point where all the markers sort of have to organize everyone, that was probably the most nervous I got. Because, you're just looking at just the front page of your exam and saying, I'm either going to do really well or just not good at all. Yeah. But, I just reminded myself, hey, I've done this like 1,000 times already, like the past month, like 5 months. Mm-hmm. So that was probably the most stressful part. Like the time conditions wasn't a problem for me. So yeah.
That's amazing. And what advice would you have for students who maybe have got not a great assessment result back for advanced maths somewhere in year 11 and year 12? Like what would you tell them?
Oh, you just got to remember it's a process. And you remind yourself that maths is a challenging subject, specifically for those students who do advanced math or extension maths. You're not really, like if you want to do the easy thing, you do standard maths or not do maths at all. But you just got to remind yourself that yes, this is challenging, and yes, it's imminent that I will have problems with math. But you just got to remember, it's a process. Like, for example, you can't just go to the gym and then pick up 100-kilogram deadlift, like first try. So you got to work on your form. You got to sort of work on yourself first before you can do that. So it's all about just being able to know that you're not going to get it first time. You got to really work hard for it, keep consistent with it, and don't be afraid to push yourself as well. Because like when I started year 11, I just did what I had to do. I just did the bare essentials. I didn't really push my limits and see how far I could go. And I feel like that's what really helped me do well, being able to push my limits and knowing that, there's hard questions, but I will be able to tackle them.